Good evening. Thank you for your patience. A few others taking their seats. I'll do that little housekeeping reminder of silencing your cell phones if you don't mind. Take a moment to do that, that'd be great. So welcome, I'm John Fiume, the Director and CEO of the Akron Art Museum, and it's great to have you here with us tonight. This is a phenomenal turnout. We're also excited to have Kent Monkman here in Akron. It's always, all right, after round of applause. It's always an honor when we're able to hear directly from an artist about their work and their perspective. First of all, we acknowledge that we gathered on lands that have long been home to indigenous people, and we honor their enduring presence and contributions. This evening, we are pleased to be here in partnership with the Akron Summit County Public Library as we celebrate the opening of Kent Monkman. History is painted by the victors, now on view at the Akron Art Museum. This exhibition brings together more than 2 decades of Kent's work and is a powerful. It invites us to look closely at history, to question what we think we know, and to recognize that the stories we inherit are not always complete. We are especially honored to have our colleagues with us this evening from the Denver Art Museum and the Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, including curators John Lukovic and Meluni Eshrat. I think I did better this time, I'm not sure. Anyhow, welcome to Akron, and thank you for being here, for your leadership in bringing this important exhibition to life. Exhibitions like this are never the work of one voice. They're built through partnership, trust, and a shared belief in the power of art to shape how we see the world. We're deeply grateful to our partners, to all the curators who shaped this project, especially our own One Euro, and to many letters and supporters have made it possible to bring this work to Akron. We're also grateful to this community and to all of you for being here tonight, for being part of this conversation. Following the talk, we hope you will join us at the Akron Art Museum to experience the exhibition up close. Believe me, it's something that you're going to want to see in person. So before we hear from Kent, it is my pleasure to introduce Dr. LaDonna Belui, who will be introducing him. Dr. Belui is a member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, a U.S. Army veteran, and a consultant whose work focuses on community, health, and culturally grounded engagements. She lives here in Harbor Falls and brings both a global perspective and a strong connection to this community. We're honored to have her here with us this evening, so please join me in welcoming Dr. LaDonna Belui.
Thank you very much. My name is LaDonna Jessie Belui. I am the daughter of Virginia Jessie. I'm the granddaughter of Ida Maytubby. I'm the great-granddaughter of Nancy Belui. I'm an enrolled member of the Choctaw Nation of Oklahoma, Halito Chishukma. I just greet you in my own language and wish you well. I'm so excited to introduce to you Kent Monkman, who is an interdisciplinary Cree visual artist and a member of the Ojibwe Sipi, the Fisher River Cree Nation in Treaty 5 territory, Manitoba, Canada. Monkman's artworks are held in the permanent collection of numerous institutions, including the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Denver Art Museum, the Smithsonian, Montreal Museum of Fine Arts, and the National Gallery of Canada. Monkman's short film and video works, collaboratively made with Giselle Borden, have springed at festivals such as Berlinale and the Toronto International Film Festival. Monkman and Borden's literary collaboration, The Memoirs of Miss Chief Eagle Tactical, a true and exact accounting of the history of Fur Island, was a finalist for the 2024 Governor General's Awards Literary Award in Fiction. Known for his provocative intervention into Western European and American art history, Monkman explores stains of colonization, sexuality, loss, and resilience, the complexities of historic and contemporary Indigenous experiences across paint, film, video, performance, and installation. Kent's traveling exhibition, History is Painted by the Victors, is the first solo show by an Indigenous artist in Akron Art Museum's history. Please help me welcome Wendy Earl and Kent Monkman.
Thank you, LaDonna, for that lovely introduction. Thank you all for being here tonight. I'm going to thank again the curators of this show, John Lukabeck and Yulia Shraki. Are they here? Or are yes, they're right there. Thank you. We are so thrilled to be the third venue on this monumental exhibition, monumental in many ways. So after we're done tonight, I hope you'll join us in going back over and seeing this beautiful artwork. Kent, thank you for being here tonight. We can't tell you how grateful we are that you've taken time out of your incredibly busy schedule with, your artwork, your multimedia, your multidisciplinary work, and spending a little time here tonight. Yeah.
Well, thank you. It's really a delight to be here in Akron, Ohio. I'm so thrilled with how the exhibition looks here, and I just want to thank everyone who supported this exhibition, who worked on this iteration on this exhibition. I'm very proud of how it looks here. It's beautiful. The design is fantastic, and I didn't have anything to do with that. I just showed up. So it's like magic, just walk in and there it is. And so it's super exciting to experience that, to see a body of work that spans more than 2 decades, assembled from many different collections, put together this way. And so again, huge thanks to John Lukabeck at Denver Art Museum and Blayley Eshradi, also at Montreal Museum of Fine Arts for their hard work on putting this together. And of course, to Wendy and John, the entire team here, it's really a privilege and an honor to be here. Thank you.
Okay, we're going to kick things off. This exhibition takes its title from one of your monumental paintings, History is Painted by the Victors. This was created in 2013 and includes many different references, including to works by Albert Bierstadt, Thomas Eakins, and the Lakota artist Red Horse. Its title is very telling, right? History is painted by the victors, an edit to the common phrase, history is written by the victors. So my first question for you tonight, how do you define history, both personally and culturally?
Couldn't we start with an easier question?
Talk about your shoes.
What's my favorite color?
Who designed your shoes?
Okay, we're jumping right in. All right. I'm warmed up. Okay, so, well, history is many things, as we know, and history is many things to many different people. And, I started I started this project of delving into the art history of this continent about 25 years ago. I started out as an abstract painter, and I spent a good 12 years pushing paint around on canvas, learning about paint, learning about the properties of paint, also trying to figure out what I wanted to say, how was I going to say it with paint, and so I learned so much about paint. And that led me to a body of work that was a very sort of, I thought I had really achieved, a very unique way of making a mark on canvas. And that was really the goal. And it's something that I guess I inherited from the ABEX painters, the abstract expressionists. It was all about, your own wiggle, your little splash or your drip or whatever mark that you use to identify yourself, to make you unique from other painters. And I had achieved that with this body of work. But at the same time, I realized I'd also created a very personal language of painting, and it left my audience outside the work. So the paintings were very cryptic. I was using the Cree language, and but what I was really wanting to talk about it was the colonial project. I was wanting to speak directly to the impact of the colonial project on myself, on my family, on my community. Specifically, I was wanting to talk about the impact of the church on Indigenous sexuality. Why had our communities become homophobic? Why had our communities become transphobic when traditionally we had a place for gender fluid people? You still have the place for gender fluid people in traditional societies. And why are we experiencing this homophobia? So, after making those marks on canvas and achieving that, that body of work, I was also kind of disappointed that people just were buying them. Well, I didn't sell very many of them, but people who were buying them were wanting to match them with their couch. So I was like, okay, this is organic. This isn't what I set out to. So it really forced me to really question my own process, to really go back to drawing board in a sense, and find a way to communicate with people more directly. And when I started to think about my work, it led me to the art history that was made on this continent by the settler artists who were here. And that opened up this larger can of worms that had to do with who tells the story of this continent. And, I'd already been starting to work a little bit with museums at that point in my career, but the more involved I got, the more I realized that it was a very one-sided story. We had European settler cultures basically, trying to reproduce Europe here in North America, plonking down a museum in the middle of, Turtle Island and trying to tell the same story that was told back in Europe, and not starting a story from the place whose land they reside from. So, as a young artist at that point, a young Indigenous artist who was trying to find his way, I was always kind of taken aback by the fact that if there was any space for me as an Indigenous artist in a museum, it was in a native way, with the masks, the totem poles, belongings, things, beautiful things, but things that have been made 150 years ago or so. And, with my contemporaries, other Indigenous artists that I was, working alongside of, we were in a battle for that space. And so I really realized that I was going to be swimming uphill with this job of bringing my truth to an audience. And so when I started looking at the work of those settler artists, I kind of had a bit of an epiphany, and I thought, if I emulate their work, I can really mess with it. I can enter their work. I can tell different narratives, with this canon of art history. And so that led to the creation of Mischief Egotistical. And thank you. I had, at that point, I'd already been looking at a lot of artists and their individual careers, like George Kaplan and John McStanley and others. And, I noticed that they were they were painting themselves into their own work sometimes. And so this idea of an ego and the artist being present at the work was very much in the foreground of, creating an alter ego that could live in their work. And so I decided that I was going to create an alter ego, a gender fluid, a very empowered gender fluid, legendary being that could live inside of those tableaux, live inside of those landscape paintings. And so I just kind of very quickly, through some transitional work that I still own, the abstract work just kind of went to the wayside, and I found my way to this representational language of painting, and I realized it's very difficult to do. And so I set out on a journey to explore history from an Indigenous perspective, but using a language that was essentially of European origin. And it's not that radical because, let's face it, Indigenous people, you've been in contact with Europeans for hundreds of years. We write novels, we write orchestras, we write operas, wake, wake, coming up here. There's just more about it there. But, But so it's a vocabulary. It's, you know, and so I was looking at this art history. You know, how Europeans kind of discarded history painting when it was kind of at its zenith, right? And you know, through the layers of art history, you know, the modernist secured, and you know, paintings became more about line or texture or color and abstraction, and that narrative possibility that was in painting just kind of got diminished over time. And so I thought, well, here's a dead and dying art medium. I'm going to work with this, you know, medium that has been discarded or already thrown into the dustbin to talk about Indigenous narratives, specifically at a time when our stories and our existence was being pushed to the side. So mid to late 19th century really was that period of, you know, the advancing of the colonial project, the signing of the treaties, the dispossession of Indigenous people from our lands here in North America. And so it seemed to me that this incredibly potent language of painting could be so useful to talk about the erasure of Indigenous narratives. So, and my favorite color is blue. No, just kidding. I don't have a favorite color because I think all color is so valuable, and we really don't have that many colors when you think about it. So I don't have a favorite color, if that answers your comment.
So to expand on that, and for those of you who have not had the chance to see Kent's work in person yet, his paintings are full of so many historical and art historical references. You need to spend so much time in front of them to get the effects and the details. I recently stood in front of the work The Deluge, which, you know, I've admired for a long time. It's this massive painting, and it takes inspiration from different works in art history, including the painter Girodet. And it wasn't until the work was installed that I realized, I'm like, oh my gosh, those hummingbirds and orchids, those are Martin John Heat. You know, just like 19th century, you may not know him, but just every single painting of yours is like that. Every single inch of the canvas has the details. So can you say a little bit more about your research process and how art history is incorporated?
Well, you know, I love the world of painting. It's so deep and vast and interesting, and there's just so many layers and so many interesting works of art that have been made through, you know, many different periods. And a bit of an art history geek, and go to museums all the time. And I've been going to museums since I can remember. Like I was that kid who identified as his artist very young. I think I was 4 or 5, and my mom was a teacher, and you know, that was really reinforced to me very young. And so I had free Saturday morning art classes as a kid. So I really grew up kind of feeling very comfortable in museums, always like being fascinated by what I found at museums. Also troubled by the fact that, yes, there wasn't a lot of representation of Indigenous reality in museums other than this sort of time capsule idea that was like a hangover from the 19th century. So I've been just fascinated with museums, and so later, as my work started to get more involved with museum collections, I would dig into a museum collection and find works of inspiration that would then lead to the creation of my own artwork. And the Deluge specifically was a painting that came out of a visit to Vertical Bridges Museum in Arkansas. And you know, that's one of the first things I do when I go to visit a new museum, is to ask the people who run the museum, who were your first people? Who are your native people of this territory? And they were like, oh, right. Yeah, we kicked them out of here. So, you know, Cherokee people were the original inhabitants of that area, and there weren't any Indigenous communities around there. So for me, that was the first thing that I wanted to address when I was thinking about what could I make, you know, what cargo could I make about my visits to this museum? What could I make about what this museum collection is about? And so I was able to stitch these different inspiration elements together to create the Deluge, which is about the flood of settlers displacing Indigenous people. and how we return to our culture, and we are led by our knowledge keepers toward preserving our culture, but also moving forward. So that painting is also very much of the future. But over the years, I've done many museum projects, and it's really kind of my niche, I guess, or my jam. I love doing it. I love going to museums and discovering sculptures or paintings, ceramics. I mean, with my team, we've created exhibitions with dinosaur remains and meteorites and that kind of thing. So museums are these repositories of endless inspiration, and so I love them. I also got involved as a trustee on a couple of museums. The Glenbow Museum in Calgary, I served as a trustee there for 7 years, and Garden Museum, the Ceramic Museum in Toronto. And I'm just deeply invested, and I believe in the power of museums because of the reach that museums have and the possibility for museums to change the narrative, to kind of reset the conversation and bring audiences to a new way of looking at the past, and not to erase it, not to cancel it, but to update it, improve it. Think about how we can make the story of this continent actually start from the people who were here first. There's a novelty.
We're trying. One day at a time. I want to talk a little bit about your studio process. You start from sketches, right? And then how does that proceed for you? What is the evolution of a painting for you?
Well, I love drawing, and again, I've been drawing my whole life, and I think drawing is just such an effective form of communication. Sometimes, pictures worth 1,000 words, as they say, and so sometimes, just getting a drawing in front of somebody can communicate much more than an essay or a news feed did. So when I have ideas for reworks, the first thing I do is just get done on paper, and whether it's pencil drawing or charcoal drawing, I really like to get ideas down that way first. And then over time, I built my studio practice. I started to employ young artists working with me, assistants who started to facilitate my ability to create work. And it started, I think my first assistant, they said, just answer Ina. And, and then it went from there. Just with canvases, and then I was training young painters, and over time, I built as a team, and currently had about 17 or 82 people. My studio director, Tourette. The fan is Brad Tion, this right here. Brad's been with me for 15 years. Over that period of time, we've evolved the studio practice into something that is, I think, very unique and something I'm very proud of. So we take those drawings, we break them down, we challenge them. I don't just have hands, I have minds working with me, very smart people who are always trying to help me achieve the greatest outcome with my work. So I'm very fortunate to have amazing people working with me. And then what we do is I decided to start working with digital photography. So I take my drawing, bring in models. At first, it started with us, just my internal team. I'd go and get some Brad or Nat Bastians, and but usually it involves me, like you're really close. I'm wearing something to be in the studio, and okay, take a picture. So it started with digital photography, and then we would take those digital photographs, reassemble them into a composition. That composition would get worked on for a while, and then that composition would then make its way to an acrylic study. And then from the study, there would be another study, more corrections, more evolutions, and then maybe another study, and eventually, you work and slowly increase the sizes of work, and as we figured out problems, compositional problems and stuff, to get to a larger scale work. And, you know, I just fell in love with large scale history painting because of the authority that they carry, you know. If you go to the Louvre or Prado, you stand in front of these paintings, you're kind of awestruck by them. And, you know, I've been working with this genre of sort of landscape painting and sort of North American painting for a number of years, but I stood at the Prado like over 12 years or so in front of these Spanish history paintings, and they made me cry, you know. I had such an emotional reaction to the power of this storytelling that was capable, you know, of an artist, you know, 150 years ago. It had sent a message into the future that made me feel something. And that's what really impacted me and made me feel like that's what I wanted to do with my own practice is, you know, kind of create a body of work that would authorize Indigenous experience, both present and past, into these history paintings that would send a message into the future to authorize our experience into the canon of art history. And so these large-scale paintings became, you know, a technical challenge to achieve. You know, how do you achieve that in this, you know, with, you know, the old masters to this, you know, a couple hundred years ago or 150 years ago, and that knowledge didn't pass down, you know, because, you know, an artist eventually became, you know, a solitary individual, you know, impoverished, miserable. And so they didn't have ateliers anymore. And so we had to figure out how to build an atelier model in the current day and age. And so I had to wear a different hat as an artist and think about how do I also orchestrate a team of people, and how do I make that work? So there's been some learning curves along the way. But I'm very proud of the fact that we have this system and this methodology in place that once we have those digital assets, they turn into studies and finally large-scale paintings. And when the MEC commission happened in 2019, you know, the curator had come to my studio a year earlier and said, you know, we're thinking of doing this MEC commission project, and we're thinking of you. I think, you know, they agreed that they were going to take this on with me. And then I think from the time that I signed the contract to the time the paintings were on the wall, it was 8 months. And there were 2 very large paintings. And that was only possible because I had spent years kind of, you know, developing the practice and the methodology of my team to build us up to that point where we could be ready, you know, should the Met call one day, we happen to be available.
That's amazing, especially given the size of those. They were actually too big to travel to us, truly, and we would have had to cut like half the rest of the show and our space. You know, this is a great segue to talk about, you know, because you have this community of people in your studio, and then this larger community, which is so important in your work from start to finish in terms of both the process and the content. Not just your Indigenous communities, but your artistic communities, and then your queer and two-spirit communities as well. Can you tell us a little bit more about how you work with communities, and maybe if that's changed at all throughout, you know, the course of your career?
Well, I think, you know, I've always been engaged in the community to some degree because, you know, as a young artist, you're always surrounding yourself with support. You need support, and you know, in my 20s, I looked up to other senior Indigenous artists that were ahead of me. And I looked to them for the trailblazing that they did in their careers to open doors in these museums that made it possible for me to kind of come along and kick them open even wider for the next generation. And so I remember just being involved, you know, in my 20s, with the Artist One Center movement in Canada, and I was part of a group of non-white artists who were basically just like trying to get artwork sharing in the Artist One Center movement. And then, you know, as the practice evolved and I started to bring in, you know, young artists to work with me, I've just always enjoyed collaborating, I think. And I think I also started making films because I wanted to collaborate. You know, when you're alone and painting in your studio, you can be kind of lonely, right? So I liked the idea of working with other artists, of having collaborative experiences. And so I started making films and doing performances, and I was collaborating with dancers, and I'm collaborating with filmmakers and musicians. And that has been just so rewarding and enriching, because it also enriches the painting practice, and they kind of feed off each other. And then in terms of my community, like, I started a portrait series probably about 10 years ago. And, we had our photo shoot going on in the studio for the Protector series, which was, honoring the land and water protectors. And so we did a call on Facebook, and, all these indigenous people came out from the community, elders, the other people, and they all wanted to be in one of my Ken Monkman painting, right? So, okay, let's do it. And then I hire all these white guys to be cops. So cops wanted to beat the shit out of them. And, everyone was asking me, like, what was this like on your set? Like, having these, like, white guys come and, like, beat up indigenous people. I was like, we had the best time. I read most of those cops were just gay guys saying, what are you? And so, our shoots are just like, they're fun, they're celebratory, they're community driven. And lately I've been working on a new series that has to do with the boarding school, the legacy of boarding schools. And so, essentially these schools, we had in Canada too, they were run by their church in Canada, which I think, I don't know what's worse, the government or the church. Oh, bad. But in Canada, we had the same thing. And when I wrote Miss Chichi's memoirs, my co-writer Giselle beat me first in his work camps. My grandmother is one of those kids who was put to work in these internment camps called schools. And so I wanted to make paintings about those, not to focus on the harshness of those places, but to educate people, to share that truth to a wider audience, but also to focus on the resilience of our elders, who were these kids who kept secretly, sometimes the Vaikush kept knowledge, who became our elders and our knowledge keepers. And so we had a couple of really amazing photo shoots with young children, indigenous families, and we brought them in. And again, it's like such a profound experience to do, working with all indigenous kids. All came in, both genders, with long hair, and we had to pile up their hair under wig caps because, at these work camps, kids all had their hair cut off. So, in the end, my practice is becoming just very much kind of grounded in community and these collaborations that are impacting people, from the portraits to the photo shoots. And then, Giselle and I, when we wrote Miss Chichi's memoir, which is available. Anyone wants to read a good book?
It's that quarter.
Yeah.
So we could get it at our gift shop, but so.
We also worked closely with for our Cree knowledge keepers, Kipule, Belinda Daniels, Gail Maurice, and
Wilford.
Wilford. No, not Wilford. No, not Wilford. Windsor, Key, Gail, Brad. Oh my gosh. I'll remember. I'll back. But they're all free language speakers, and they all shared a knowledge of that they have about the language. And Floyd Crayful, my bad, Floyd, love you. You're here. And all incredible. Floyd's a theater artist. He also joined Kurt. And again, like my work I also did work in Indigenous theater. I've been involved with the Imaginative Media Arts Festival. We've also been supporting Indigenous fashion arts. These are all super important movements in our community where there is just an incredible outpouring of creativity coming out of our communities that we love to participate in because we get so much out of it, and we love to deal with support communities to the creation of their.
Yeah. your work really lends itself to so many different media because of this collaborative style, this history, this research that you embody every day. I'm going to jump ahead because this is a great segue, but perhaps a little bit about some Opry stuff that might be happening.
Oh, well, thank you for asking. I asked, so you're asking. So, when I wrote, Mischief's Opera actually came out of writing museum labels. Let me go back to the memoir. So, Mischief's memoir as a book project came out of writing museum labels in Mischief's voice. And I created an exhibition in Toronto called Shane and Prejudice, and it was Canada Oaks Journey 150 in 2017. And I've been commissioned to create an exhibition to kind of offer Canadians the counter-narrative to their celebrations of Canada. So I just asked the country to think about what the last 150 years have meant to Indigenous people, and it had 9 chapters that dealt with the colonial project. And I decided I'm going to have Mischief write these labels because I was curating this exhibition, and you were borrowing museum objects and kind of pairing them with my own paintings and that kind of thing. And then every time I sat down to write them, I had writer's block. And then finally, we were 2 weeks before the deadline, and I thought, oh shit, I'm in trouble. So I called Giselle, my long-suffering dear friend who I've collaborated with before, and she says, "You idiot, why did you wait 2 weeks before the deadline to call me?" And so she helped me find Mischief's voice and bring it to the page, and that had never happened before. She did it so beautifully, so succinctly. And as a curator, how hard it is to write the museum label and distill a complex idea of a painting into 120 words. Very difficult, but she did it, and 2 of us were thrilled that Mischief's voice had emerged through a museum label project. So a book publisher saw the exhibition and said, "I would love to do a book project with you. Would you like to do a book on you, Kent?" And I was like, "No, but I had this idea for Mischief's memoirs." Giselle and I had kind of batted around the idea. And so the memoir emerged kind of from there. Of course, I underestimated how huge a project it was. And it ended up taking 6 years to write. Giselle and I, being artists, novel writers, ended up with more footnotes and endnotes than there was text. Because it was so thoroughly researched, and it was so, we wanted it to be deeply bulletproof, so it couldn't be attacked as, myth or, simply storytelling. And so it's a deeply researched book, and it's deeply embedded in the Cree knowledge systems and the Cree language. And so the opera, the exhibition had gone to Denver, and then it was going to Montreal, and the director of the Montreal Opera, at the Montreal Museum, called me and says, "Hey, do you like Borbal Peck? What do you think if we had Borbal Peck, perform at your opening?" I was like, "Okay, as long as Mischief can come on stage and spank him and take his mask off." If you don't know Borbal Peck, he's a gay country and Western singer, and he wears masks. So, and then, of course, I was kidding, but not really. And then I said, if y'all have money to hire Orville Peck, you probably have a little bit of money to give me, some money to write, put some kind of musical performance on stage, because it was a chamber music hall that is part of the museum campus. And so I took that as the opportunity to, hire a longtime collaborator, Dustin and Giselle, and I wrote the libretto, and we got 3 scenes on stage at the Montreal Museum, which is the birth of the Mischief Opera, kind of telling this mythic story of her life, and we are ready to take it to the world and develop it further. So we had this idea for this 3-act opera. Thank you for asking.
So if any of you are opera producers, it's to know, let's talk. and see if we can bring this to some other locations. Yeah.
I don't sing, but I cast the best mezzo soprano in Canada, Marion Newman, as the first Miss Chief, and she is incredible. And I'm gonna have probably different singers or different genders play her Miss Chief's role because she's a gender fluid. But so yeah, I won't be singing, but Marion Newman is Quapaquage. And so the first Miss Chief that, other than me, was this incredible mezzo soprano. And so I'm super happy with the evolution of this project.
Yeah. We'll look for that too. Maybe something for the future. Can you talk a little bit more about Miss Chief? And I know that Miss Chief is a very powerful figure, right? And a very sexual and sensuous figure. How did Miss Chief start, and where do you see Miss Chief going in the future? Because she can travel through time, right?
So she started kind of, as I mentioned, as a way to respond to those settler artists that were, encountering Indigenous people, making images of them, specifically George Catlin, and he was making paintings of himself, but he encountered a gender fluid person, throughout his travels. He could encounter this. He made one painting called Dance to the Verhash in the Sagreen Fox tribe where he visited, and it was an honor dance to the Verhash, as the French referred to the two-spirit person. And so I kind of became obsessed with that painting, and I realized that at that time that I wanted to create my own character that could live inside and work and reverse the gaze, and so Miss Chief was born to really represent an empowered understanding of our way of thinking about sexuality and gender without the shame of the European binary understanding. So she's often not wearing a lot of clothes. If she is wearing anything, it's usually Louboutin heels or how about the Louis Vuitton quiver or something like that. So she likes fashion, and fashion is also part of her form of expression. And that's very true for a lot of Indigenous people, is that we like to express ourselves or like to express our cultural ways through the things that we wear. And so Miss Chief is a very expressive individual. She is a legendary being, and so in creating that character, in writing the memoir, we had an opportunity to really stitch her into Cree cosmology. And so my work with Floyd and Belinda and Keith and Gail was all about stitching her into our teachings, our cosmology, so that she would fit into our world of the legendary beings, the Piesiwak, the thunder beings, the Nimigwesiwak, the little people, Wasagachak, our trickster founder. And you'll see these beings enter her world in these paintings upstairs, and it's a really deep, vast universe of knowledge and science. And so Miss Chief is, she's going to be around in the future. I don't know exactly what form she'll take in the artworks of the future, but we are now working, thanks to the memoir, working on Miss Chief's authoritative cycle of paintings. It's called the Miss Chief Cycle. And I took inspiration from Rubens' cycle of Medici cycle, his cycle of paintings of the Maria Medici. A couple of dozen very large-scale history paintings, and so that's kind of one of our future projects, along with the opera.
Mm-hmm. That's very exciting for all of us who have been very avidly following Miss Chief throughout her lifespan. This is, as some of you have probably noticed from these paintings that are flashing by, there is a really strong sense of humor and playfulness in your work. And you've also become incredibly successful, where you're being pulled in a million different directions, have probably so many administrative and logistical duties and so many appearances, but you've still managed to keep your sense of humor throughout your career. Can Can you talk a little bit about that? How did that sense of humor first start appearing in your paintings, and how have you kept that?
I think it's just an important part of life, right? Like we all like to laugh and we all like to kind of diffuse difficult situations with laughter. Like, I'm very proud of you. But it's, it's part of human existence, and it's certainly strong in our storytelling, free storytelling. The stories are very sexy and funny, and when we gave the memoir to our knowledge keepers, the first draft of it, I wasn't sure exactly the tone that, I was thinking of, because I was modeling the memoir on Catton's journals, on Delafota journals. I really loved this idea of a 19th century journal, and so I was trying to find the tone for it, right? And all four of them sent it back and said, make it funnier and make it sexier. So that's a very free way of being. And so I was like, okay, well, I have my permission and we're going to go for it. And so I think, humor is just an important part of the character. It's okay to laugh at her, laugh with her. And, I think I think it's also a strategy to disarm my audience. I do look at some pretty dark subjects like the border schools and dispossession of land, incarceration of Indigenous people, and I carry the weight of those subjects on me. But I'm always looking for that way out, and I want to give my audience a way out, because as I'm bringing them in, I want to bring you into our truths. I'm not bringing you to our stories, I'm not bringing you to our experiences, but I also want to be able to make you laugh. You might cry, but I want to give you a way out of the work, and I think that's really important. It's like a release valve, for you when you experience the work. And I think, good comedy is exactly that. A good stand-up comic can go to some pretty dark territory and still make you laugh. And I think that's one of my goals, is to also write stand-up comedy. No, just kidding. Well, I'm nervous, sir.
You would find that audience for that, I feel like. No, thank you for that. It truly is so true, not just with the human subjects, but with some of the animals, and thinking about the history of animal and plant life, in the last 500 years on this hemisphere, and some of the really troublesome, changes that those have gone through. There's like Les Castors de Ra, there's a really tough painting, and you're going to have for those of you who are going to go see the show, you're going to have a hard time looking at it, but then there is this element of humor that does help you make it through. Your paintings do show an incredible diversity of the natural world and the animal life, both now as it exists and then as it existed historically. So how does your relationship with the natural world manifest through your paintings?
Well, again, I think the indigenous way of thinking about the natural world is that you're in kinship with all living beings, right? And so that's just like deeply embedded in how indigenous people think and how we exist in this world. And I think this idea of I just want the world to learn more about indigenous people. And so, if I can use my platform with the portraits to shed light on these incredible people in our community, if I can guide people to other artists or knowledge keepers, for me that is a woman, bringing an audience who doesn't know very much about indigenous people closer to us so that they can learn, and hopefully we can heal and make the world a better place, because indigenous people have so much to offer in terms of how we think about the world and the beauty that's there. I mean, those children who were put into these internment camps, I refer to it as fierce hope. They had to have fierce hope to not only survive, but to come out of those experiences and to raise their own children and their grandchildren. And so I know that still exists. That like my elder Pauline Sherd is this incredible person. She's no longer with us in this world, but she's someone who taught those values, those values in our culture, Greek culture of love and kinship and wakotuin, and just being in love and kinship with everybody and everything. And of course, there's conflict, and of course there are people, you know, that you don't like, but those principles are deeply there to help guide. And I think those are things that I come back to in my practice, and those are things that I want to come from the work itself, because the work is made from love, and it's about proving the world and putting out these messages of kindness and acceptance, and that's really what Wishcheek is about, you know.
That is such a lovely sentiment, and I think, unfortunately, due to our timing, that's going to have to be our final words on the subject. I know for some of you who have some questions, we're gather those, and we'll try and get to those throughout the run of the exhibition for Ken. But you can blame me for my time management tonight, but we're going to have to end things here because the party's going to continue at the Akron Art Museum. So first of all, thank you, Kent, for being here tonight and for sharing a little bit of your incredible work. Thank you to Dr. Nadal for helping guide us, kick us off with such a thoughtful and engaging conversation. Thank you to everyone who made this night possible. Everyone who from Kent's team, from Denver Art Museum, from Montreal Museum of Fine Arts. So we're going to invite you back to the Akron Art Museum to continue this evening. You really have to see Kent's work in person to experience it. Initially, it's free for members, and also please do not miss the gift shop. We have an amazing selection of works that Kent's team helped work on. It's such a dear part of the show. I'm really excited about it. We appreciate all of you taking the time here on this rainy evening with us. We hope that this is the start of some really important conversations that we're going to continue to have in Akron at the Akron Art Museum. And thank you again for being here, and have a very nice night.
Thank you.